My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 42 years old, and 2 weeks before my sister's wedding, my parents invited me round for tea, sat me at the end of their oak dining table in Harrogate, and handed me a typed list of 5 conditions for the privilege of attending. By 6:30, I'd booked a week in St Ives. By 8, I'd started making the last gift I was ever going to send to that family, as the version of me they preferred. If you've got a quiet few minutes, stay with me, because what happened after that still feels unreal when I say it out loud. And if stories like this are your sort of thing, the slow burning kind where people reveal themselves by inches, you're very welcome to subscribe and settle in. Also, I'm always curious where these stories land. If you're listening from Birmingham, Brisbane, Boston, somewhere much smaller with one windy high street and a decent bakery, I do like picturing that while I talk. I repair old books for a living. Not the glossy new ones people leave face down on trains. I mean ledgers, prayer books, atlases, family Bibles, estate records, things with split spines and fox paper and names written inside by people long gone. I work in a small bindery off Mickergate in York, and if you've never stood in a room that smells faintly of paste, it's a gentler life than it sounds. My family calls it that little craft thing. My sister Celia calls it lovely, in a niche way, which is her preferred method of insult because it arrives wearing lip gloss and manners. She was getting married in late June at Rudding Park. Big wedding, white roses, string quartet, groom from a family my mother described as proper, which in our house has always meant wealth without visible effort. I hadn't had an easy year with them. Our grandmother, June, died the autumn before, and she left me 2 things my sister wanted very badly. Her Edwardian sapphire brooch and a small cash sum she'd set aside because, in Nan's words, you're the one who makes things last. My parents acted as though I'd pulled both out a hat. The row about that never fully ended. It merely put on a cardigan and started calling itself tension. So when Mum rang and said, "Pop over, love, we need to sort the wedding," I went because some habits are stitched in young. The list was on cream paper. My mother had typed it and clipped the pages together as though she were handing me parking regulations. She said, "These are only sensible boundaries." That sentence alone should have sent me straight back to the car. Condition 1. I was not to wear black, navy, green, or anything too distinctive. Beige, dove, or soft taupe would be best. Condition 2. I was not to sit with immediate family during the wedding breakfast because it may be simpler socially. Condition 3. If anyone from Daniel's side asked what I did, I was to say I did occasional administrative work and was still considering next steps. Condition 4. I was to bring Nan's sapphire brooch for Celia to wear at the reception and leave it with my mother afterwards for safekeeping. Condition 5. During the evening, if the subject of the past year came up, I was to say that any misunderstanding over Nan's estate had been my fault and that my parents had done their best. I remember reading the pages twice, not because I hadn't understood them, but because part of me still hoped I had. My father sat there stirring tea he'd forgotten to drink. Celia watched my face the way some people watch a pan they think might boil over. Mum folded her hands and said, "If you can do those 5 simple things, of course you can come." Of course! As though attendance at my own sister's wedding had become a small grant application, I looked down at the paper again. In my trade, when a book has been pressed too hard for too long, the spine starts to remember the wrong shape. It will still open, but not kindly. That was the moment something in me stopped trying to open kindly. Celia gave a little laugh and said, "Oh, don't make it bigger than it is, Ellie. We just need one day without awkwardness." One day without awkwardness. Meaning one day in which I agreed to be edited. Tell me honestly, if someone asked you to attend a family celebration on those terms, would you still call that an invitation? I asked Mum why on earth I'd claimed to do admin. She gave me the look she has reserved for moments when she believes the answer is embarrassingly obvious. "Book repair sounds unstable," she said. "And Daniel's aunt is the sort who asks follow-up questions." I said, "I restore manuscripts for the Bar Convent archive and private collectors." My mother replied, "Exactly. Too much explaining. My sister did not defend me. That is important." She didn't shout or roll her eyes or openly agree with Mum. She did something far more useful to difficult families. She sat very still and let it happen. Then she said, "And the brooch should be mine anyway. Nan only left it to you because you happened to be there that week." That part landed harder than the rest. I had been there that week because Nan was dying and someone had to sit with her through the night. Celia had sent flowers. There's a difference. I put the pages back on the table, lined them up with the wood grain because it gave my hands something to do, and said no. Mum blinked. No to what? All of it. The silence after that was almost elegant. My father finally spoke. Don't be hasty. I said, I'm being exact. Then I stood, picked up my bag, and left while my mother was still explaining how disappointed everyone would be if I chose selfishness over family. Outside, the evening was bright in that northern way it gets in June, when even unpleasant moments happen under a perfectly innocent sky. I sat in my car on the Stray and booked a room in St Ives for 5 nights, Porthminster side. Sea view if you leaned a little. It wasn't drama. It was oxygen. On the drive back to York, Celia rang 3 times. I didn't answer until I was outside my bindery. Keys in hand, she started without hello. So that's it? You'd skip my wedding over a few harmless requests? I said, you asked me to lie about my life, give up Nan's brooch, sit away from my own family, and apologise for something I didn't do. She sighed, which was somehow worse than shouting. You always do this. You turn everything into principle. There are sentences that explain an entire relationship. That was one of ours. I said, and you turn everything into presentation. Then I hung up. Back upstairs in the workroom, I unlocked the flat file where I keep the good paper and took out a bundle of heavy ivory sheets, linen thread, and a roll of pale blue book cloth I'd been saving, because once I'd said no, I knew exactly what I wanted to send. Not a scene, not a text war, not one of those long family emails people forward to cousins for sport. A record. My grandmother believed records mattered. She wrote dates inside recipe books and names on the backs of photographs, and once told me, if people can rewrite what happened, they usually will. So I made a book, a beautiful one too, quarter-bound in blue cloth with cream boards. Her initials on the front in small gold letters. CM inside cover lined with marbled paper. Proper kettle stitches. Good spine. The sort of object people lower their voices around. On the title page I wrote in my neatest hand, for Celia, on your wedding day. Since truth seems to go missing in this family, I thought I'd bind a copy. Then I gave each of the 5 conditions its own page, not in my words, in theirs. I printed the exact messages, the wording from the typed list, and below each one I tipped in copies of the follow-up texts. Wear something quiet, sit elsewhere, say admin. Bring the brooch, accept the blame. At the end, I added one final page. I won't attend any room where my dignity is the entry fee. The brooch is enclosed because it belonged to Nan, not to your performance of her. The rest I'm keeping, my name, my work, and the right to tell the truth in my own voice. Love, Ellen or I stitched a small ribbon mount into the backboard and fastened the sapphire brooch there so it couldn't fall about in the post. No smashed cake, no glitter bomb, no theatrical curse. Just their own words, properly preserved. Maybe you think that was cold. Even now, part of me still tests it in my mind. But when a family asks for silence, dressed up as peace, what exactly are you meant to hand back to them? I posted it 2 days before the wedding with one card tucked under the ribbon. For the top table. Please open during speeches. That last line, I admit, was the only sharp flourish. Then I packed a case, took the train southwest and went to Cornwall. St Ives in June is almost unfairly lovely. Blue water, white railings, gulls behaving like minor royalty. On the morning of the wedding, I bought a coffee, sat above Porthmuir, and felt lighter than I had in months. At 11, Mum left a voicemail saying there was still time to come if I decided to be sensible. At 1, my father sent a text with just 3 words. Please reconsider, Ellie. At 3:30, as I was walking back from the Tate with sand in my shoes, my cousin Ruth sent, "Are you sitting down?" followed by a video. She'd filmed it badly from somewhere near the top table, mostly flowers and elbows, but there was Celia in ivory silk, smiling for the room while Daniel untied the ribbon on my parcel. You could hear someone say, "Oh, from your sister?" Celia opened the book, her smile held for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned the first page, and whatever she saw on her own face must have frightened her more than the words did, because she let out this sharp, involuntary scream that cut clean across the room. Not horror like in films, more the sound a person makes when the floor drops half an inch, and only they feel it. The whole marquee went quiet. Daniel took the book from her, read a page, then another. His mother leaned in. My mother stood so fast her chair tipped backwards. My father went pale. Somewhere in the background, a fork hit a plate. Ruth's phone shook because she was trying not to laugh. Celia said very loudly, "Why would she do this here?" And Daniel, to his credit, asked the only sensible question in the room, why were there conditions at all? That apparently was when the real trouble started. According to Ruth, my mother tried to snatch the book away, which only made Daniel's aunt take it. Then Celia started crying. Mum started saying I'd always been unstable, and Daniel's father, who had the air of a man who irons tea towels, said, Janet, these appear to be your words. It turns out the truth looks especially rude when it's bound in linen and laid beside the wedding favours. Ruth sent another message 10 minutes later. Your mum's in the ladies. Daniel and Celia are fighting near the dance floor. Your dad looks about 90. And then, because cousins are sometimes gifts from God, honestly fair play, I stayed in St. Ives until Tuesday. I swam once badly. 8 chips on a bench. Slept with the window open. I did not answer my mother's calls. Celia rang on the second night. Her voice had that scraped out quality people get after a day spent crying in expensive makeup. You humiliated me, she said. I was sitting on the bed with a paperback in my lap and the sea somewhere beyond the glass. No, I said. I declined your terms. Then I returned them to sender. She went quiet, then softer. Daniel nearly called off the reception. I believed her. After a pause, I asked the question that had sat in me ever since Harrogate. Did you know all 5 were wrong? Another pause. Yes. There it was. Plain at last. Not confusion. Not manipulation by our mother. Knowledge, I said. That's why I didn't come. She cried then properly, but I couldn't rescue her from a decision she'd helped make. Not this time. When I got back to York, my father came by the bindery on Thursday morning carrying a loaf from the bakery on Bishopthorpe Road, and looking as though life had become too loud for him, he stood among the presses and paper stacks and said, Your mother says you were vindictive. I waited, then he added, I think you were accurate. You could have knocked me over with a feather. He sat for a while, turning a bone folder over in his hands, and finally said, I should have spoken when she made that list. Yes, I said. He nodded. I know. That was the nearest thing to honesty we'd had in years. I wish I could tell you my family changed overnight. They didn't. People rarely do. My mother still prefers a polished story to a true one. Celia and I still speak carefully, like women crossing ice, but something did change, and it changed in me. For years I had allowed them to write in the margins of my life. Difficult, sensitive, unsettled. The sort of daughter who should be grateful to be included at all. I don't permit it now. Nan's brooch came back to me, by the way. Daniel posted it 3 weeks later with a note that simply said, this seemed to belong with the person who respected her. I keep it in the top drawer of my bench, wrapped in soft cloth, next to my best awl, and the brass ruler Nan used to tap against my knuckles when I rushed a stitch, and sometimes when I'm sewing a new spine onto an old book. I think about that wedding and the little scream that ran across a room full of roses and polished cutlery. It wasn't terror, not really. It was the sound of a lie being made to hold its own weight. So that was my sister's wedding. 5 conditions, 1 train to Cornwall, and a final gift that said exactly what I'd been asked to swallow. Tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? Gone anyway, for the sake of peace, or wrapped the truth in blue cloth and posted it first class?